the aspect of inclusive pedagogy, as well as how AI plays into it, is something that we really need to talk about and is something that all of us really need to take into consideration. To begin with, we'll look at AI and inclusive pedagogy as far as how AI can sometimes be detrimental to inclusive pedagogy. We have to think, are we making assignments or are we incorporating AI into education, but in a way that makes it difficult for some students to be able to use the AI? So if I make an assignment and I say you need to use AI for this component, do my students have access to the AI? Do they have access to the right type of AI? This is an important thing because some of us in education are starting to look at the very powerful AI, such as the paid version of ChatGPT, such as more advanced versions of Copilot, all these things. Well, those require money in order to have access. So we have to consider the student. Does the student have access? Is the university paying for it? If not, then we have to be cognizant of that and then think about, okay, how can we use the regular free versions of AI, whether that's the free version of ChatGPT or using Microsoft Bing to be able to access some more advanced AI, but in a slightly different way. So we need to consider all these things as far as how's the student being able to even access it. Now, here's another big part that a lot of us don't think about. A lot of students are using their cell phones for everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. I mean, they're using their cell phones to type out reports. They're using their cell phones to answer questions online. They're using their cell phones to do research. Or maybe they're using, hopefully, at least an iPad or some sort of tablet. Of course, the primary best thing would be for them to be using a notebook or a cell phone, an actual computer. But a lot of students are mainly using their cell phone. So we have to think, how can they access the AI on their cell phone? Do they know how to access the AI on their cell phone? Is that experience different than the experience that we have as instructors that mainly use our notebooks? So we have to consider those things. So that's an important part as far as understanding this idea of inclusive pedagogy with regards to AI. So those are some issues as far as being detrimental or not. Now, before I go too much further, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page as far as understanding what we mean when we say inclusive pedagogy. Inclusive pedagogy is nothing more than this understanding of student-centered pedagogy. So student-centered instruction, student-centered pedagogy, those are all very similar to this idea of inclusive pedagogy. Because when we talk about inclusive pedagogy, we're talking about ensuring that whatever we do in the classroom, the design of our course, we're thinking about the student, we're including the student, and we're making sure that all students in our class are part of the process. So that means that we are being student-centered. We can't be student-centered if we're excluding some of our students. That's the whole idea here. So we have to think, okay, what does that mean? Well, when we are conducting our teaching and learning, there are three main aspects that we really have to be considering. And that's going to be the environment of the learning activities that we actually do, and then our own teaching presence. All three of those things will drastically affect the student-centered pedagogy, the student-centered instruction, how that works, as well as this aspect of inclusive pedagogy. And the big part about this is that AI can assist us with all of these different aspects. The two big words here are that we want to be equitable and we want to be inclusive. So by equity, we simply mean we want to be fair and impartial. We want to treat everybody equal. That's pretty simple. And then with this inclusion aspect, we're talking about a practice or a policy, what we do to provide equal access to opportunities and resources, especially those typically marginalized minority groups, disabled, etc. Now, with those marginalized groups, all we're saying is that people that have a tendency to be marginalized, again, we have to make sure that they're not, but you don't even need to get to that point if you are properly going through and being student-centered, meaning that you're thinking about all your students, regardless of any identity factor, of any aspect of their background, their race, ethnicity, disability, any of those variables. It doesn't matter. because we're focusing on this idea of we're being student-centered. So by being properly student-centered, we're going to be equitable and we're going to be inclusive. But let's address the very first point, right, about making sure that we have this environment where we have a safe environment that the students feel safe in, so that when we are conducting our instruction, we're doing our learning activities, this environment is set up so that students feel safe, so that students can freely express themselves, so that each student feels valued and supported, so that they can participate. Because if they don't feel safe, if they think that they're going to be mocked, or they think that the critiques might be so severe, then they're not going to be active participants in the learning. So that's why it's up to us as the instructors to set up this learning environment, to lay down some foundational rules within the classroom to talk about, hey, we're going to treat each other civilly. We're going to learn from one another. We're going to help each other learn and grow. So it's important that everyone understands that, hey, yeah, people are going to be treated equally. People are going to act in a civil way, and I'm going to ensure that that occurs. Why? Because I want to definitely ensure that we have this proper learning environment. One great way to enhance the learning environment through the use of AI is by thinking about how can I design different assignments or use the AI to help with my students' learning in the first place. We can do different things, such as using AI as a simulator. Maybe you have a class discussion coming up on a topic. Maybe you have a presentation that they're going to have to do. If you use AI to create different prompts that the students could then use on their own to practice their presentation, to practice the classroom discussion, this gives much more agency to the students in that now they can be better ready, be better prepared, so that they can reduce whatever anxiety that they might have in participating in class. So by doing something like that, now we enhance our learning environment because I'm giving all these opportunities to my students to develop themselves to be able to properly perform in the classroom. So that's definitely an idea there for enhancing this overall learning environment. Other aspects of AI literacy in itself will help with that by helping them to develop critical thinking skills. Remember, one of the major components of AI literacy is critical thinking. So the more that I can help my students develop that capability, the more I'm creating this learning environment where they feel empowered and where they have the capabilities to properly function. Again, we also have to think about them having proper access to the AI, that they can use the AI. So we have to prepare them properly. So we do need to develop some prompt engineering skills. We do need to help them develop an understanding of how AI works. That's why the AI literacy should always be something fundamental that gets incorporated into the class. That should be some of the student learning outcomes so that they gain these capabilities to use this tool to enhance their capabilities overall to be better learners within the classroom. So that's another great way that the learning environment can be enhanced through the use of AI. Other ideas come simply from using the AI as an instructional designer and thinking about, well, how can I make my class better? Posing questions directly about your activity. We're going to be doing this activity. Is there anything I should think about as far as making it as inclusive as possible? Throwing that into an AI will give you feedback on different things to consider, different possibilities. An example would be where you have a certain activity. My case was I had an activity where they had to practice active listening. So the way that I had it originally was in a certain number of groups within a certain number of people within a group, and then they got an opportunity to do active listening. But then I ran my whole activity through an AI like ChatGPT, and I asked it to help identify any issues with inclusive pedagogy. And it talked about how making sure that everyone gets an opportunity to actually go through the process of active listening, making sure that people have proper instructions, making sure that people are encouraged in the right way to set the instructions to begin with on how they're going to critique each other, not just leaving it up to them, but ensuring that, again, this civil interaction is properly explained so that everyone feels confident enough to properly participate. So again, great little things, great little additions that the AI can give us when we run things through an AI, just to get a second pair of eyes, just to get another possibility of enhancement. When we're talking about an inclusive pedagogy and addressing learning activities, Now there's a couple of different things that we should also take into consideration. Things like, how ready are our students for this learning activity? Have they been properly prepared? Have they developed the skills and they are cognitively ready to actually perform these activities that we're going to be doing in class? So ensuring that we have proper instructions, that we've already gone through the necessary steps so that they can effectively perform these learning activities. So that's an important thing. We can't just jump to something without them being ready. That really undermines this whole idea of being inclusive, because if we're just assuming certain people can do it, but we haven't prepared them, well, then there's going to be issues. So we really need to take that into account. I know that a lot of times there's prerequisites for our class, so we're assuming that they know all that information. It's important for us, if we're being inclusive, that we let students know that, hey, we're going to be doing this activity, so you need to be ready to do this. Some students may not be ready, so they might need additional guidance. What I like to do in my class is every week I have an additional assets folder with up on our learning management system. So in there will be some additional information that they might need in order to perform the activity. Now, they should be ready to do the activity from what we've already learned, but if they have issues, or they didn't do a prerequisites, or they forgot some things from a previous class, they can access that needed information within that additional assets folder. So that's a key important thing to always consider, especially as we move up with higher level courses. A powerful way that we can use AI is to create those additional assets. We can ask the AI to give us quizzes or to give us summaries of information. Even now, AI can help us with developing videos and images. So we can use all those things when we develop things like infographics or study guides or all these additional asset components that will help the student to be able to actively perform in our learning activities. Additionally, in being inclusive, we want to ensure that everyone understands that they are expected to participate. They're expected to participate because this is a community, so we're learning as a community. So we need to set these expectations on that, hey, part of your grade requires you to participate. So that's already an expectation. And then we're going to set them up for success by showing them what the correct output is going to look like, right? So demonstrating what right looks like, that's an inclusive aspect as well, making sure that they're ready to perform, making sure that they feel valued, and then also making sure that they don't have cognitive overload. So that's another component of ensuring inclusivity, is by presenting information that's understandable and easy to understand by going through it in a logical sequence and not just everything at once. So this kind of goes back to properly presenting information in general for it to be as effective as possible. So avoiding cognitive overload is another important part of student-centered pedagogy. Reflection. Reflection is another big part, and that goes in two different ways. One, reflection on us. We need to be reflecting on what we're doing with our presentation of information, with our learning activities, reflecting on how are my students understanding this information? How are they taking this information? Am I properly including everyone? The way that I'm presenting information makes a big impact in how they're receiving that information. So by going through and reflecting, contemplating what we've done, seeing how we can do things better on our own, thinking that through, and then also getting their feedback. That really enhances this whole idea of inclusive pedagogy when we include everyone in the feedback that we're getting. So that might be through individual surveys, that might be through a discussion, but even in that discussion, making sure that everyone's voices are heard. So that means it might be calling on people directly, even though they might not want to. We need to bring them out because, again, everyone's expected to participate, so we want that feedback from everyone. And then finally, we have this idea of teaching presence. So our teaching presence, how we present ourselves, what actions do we take in the classroom, that really affects this whole idea of inclusive pedagogy, of student-centered pedagogy. Why? Because I'm thinking about how my students are going to be reacting to me. So that means things like approachability. How approachable am I? Well, we have to understand that if a student doesn't view me as approachable, then they're not going to come to me with questions. They're not going to seek additional guidance from me. They're not going to come to my office hours if I'm not approachable. So then that then relates to how am I interacting in the classroom? Do I ever once show a smile? That's a big aspect of approachability. How am I phrasing things when I talk to people? How am I providing feedback? Am I also giving positive feedback and not just negative feedback? These are all important aspects for this approachability, the interaction. How am I interacting with students? Am I properly protecting students from being overly criticized by other students? Again, the civil aspect that we talked about with the environment, but that I play a specific role in that I'm ensuring that I'm building this community. I'm building this community. So that means that I'm getting feedback from the students, I'm talking to them, I'm helping them see that they are learning from one another as well. And even in the way that I communicate when I talk about the class topic, I need to make sure that I'm giving examples that are going to be understandable by my students, by all of my students. That might require multiple examples. If I'm talking about physics or math and I say, oh, like in baseball, when the batter hits the baseball and it goes in this trajectory, okay, I'm using baseball as an analogy there. Does everyone know about baseball? Do males love to play baseball? But that's an assumption. Maybe none of my males play baseball, so they're not even into it. Do I have students that are from another country, so they don't even have that sport in their country? I have to think about cultural aspects as well in order to be fully inclusive. I have to be thinking about what examples do I need to give. Now, that baseball example, that might be a great example on talking about trajectory, but I might need to incorporate multiple examples in order to ensure that everyone grasps the information. That's a key thing, thinking about my students in that way. Not just what's a good example as far as I'm concerned, but a good example as far as they're concerned. And again, the AI can really help us with that because we could put in that example about trajectory in baseball, and then I could ask it, hey, give me another example about this topic. What else could I use to help my students understand this? The AI is really, really good at giving us multiple examples. And that's if you're using ChatGPT, the Gemini, Bard, whatever version, whatever is out there. And again, those will continue to progress and get better. But think about that. Really think about being inclusive in your classroom and using the AI to help you with that, because there's so many capabilities that it can do to give you those examples, to give you those activities, to really help to include everyone in the understanding and then also in the participation. You really have to work hard to develop that overall community. And then that goes to the next part, which deals with understanding that we're dealing with a community of inquiry model here. Because if we look at these different aspects, we have a social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence. So us as the instructor, we're making these decisions on selecting the content. We're making these decisions on setting the climate. That's the environment of supporting discourse, ensuring that there's discussion, that everyone participates, that everything is being done in a civil manner. And in this way, we can maximize the educational experience by all students. Why? Because we're using inclusive pedagogy. And what is inclusive pedagogy? Again, it's student-centered pedagogy. It's the full expression of student-centered pedagogy because we're being equitable and we're being inclusive. So that's really what I want you to grasp in this, and that there's all sorts of political issues dealing with diversity, equity, inclusion. We can look beyond all that. We can look beyond the politics and just focus on this idea of, yes, we want to be equitable. That makes sense. Yes, we want to be inclusive. We want to make sure that everyone participates so everyone can learn and can understand the topic and have this best educational experience possible. And AI can definitely help us to achieve that. Thank you, everyone. And please remember to subscribe, share this with other people so that they can develop this understanding. And together as a community, this is a community itself, we can help everyone develop AI literacy skills, have a better educational experience overall because they're incorporating AI, and we can definitely get a lot and learn from one another. And remember, learning is for life.